Have you ever sat at home alone when suddenly you feel a presence around you?
Oh my
Have you ever
God.
heard something go bump in the night? No matter whether you believe in the paranormal or not, we've all experienced things that we can't explain. It's time to make sure your lights are switched on, because here are the 15 most haunted houses on Earth. Number 15. The Sallie House, Kansas. Built in the mid-1800s in Atchison, Kansas, from the outside the notorious Sallie House looks like any other. It is, however, considered to be one of the most haunted houses in the U.S. And while it's possible to stay there overnight, all guests have to sign a waiver upon entry to take responsibility for any injuries they may suffer while on the property. The home once belonged to the town's doctor and was where he treated all of his patients. One day, the mother of 6-year-old Sally rushed in with her daughter in her arms after she had collapsed with abdominal pains. The doctor knew straight away that this was a case of appendicitis and that he'd have to operate quickly to prevent the organ from bursting inside her body. There was just enough time to give her some painkillers, but not enough to let them fully take effect. So as the surgery began, the house was filled with chilling screams from the girl. Unfortunately, the procedure failed, and Sally died on the operating table, with her final thought being of this evil man who she believed was torturing her. More than 100 years later, in 1993, a couple moved into the house and soon began experiencing weird events that appeared to prove that the spirit of Sally has been trapped there. Strange cold spots, unexplained fires, and mysterious attacks on the husband became common, as did technical malfunctions, objects seemingly moving on their own, and animals refusing to enter some of the rooms.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Number 14. Chateau du Brizac, France. Chateau du Brizac is a stunning building that was first constructed in Maine-et-Loire in France in the 11th century as a castle. With 7 stories, it's the tallest in France and has become a residence as well as a film set in subsequent years. But with so much history and gruesome events that took place within these walls, it's perhaps no surprise that many believe the place to be haunted. There are several ghosts that are reported by guests, the most common one being the Green Lady. Said to be the specter of an illegitimate daughter of King Charles VII, she was supposedly murdered in the chateau by her husband who had caught her having an affair. To this day, she's said to walk around the chapel and the rooms next to it, completely covered in a green dress and veil, with holes where her eyes and mouth should be. Her moans and cries can be heard echoing out across the entire building on quiet nights, which has resulted in the chateau becoming a very popular destination for ghost hunters and those wanting to test their bravery by staying overnight in one of the lavish rooms that retain all of their original historical features. Number 13. Hofti House, Iceland. The story behind the Hofti House in Reykjavik, Iceland is a strange one because it was not only the site of an incredibly important historic event, but it's also been linked with tales of hauntings that have taken far more seriously than most. Built in 1909, it had several famous inhabitants, such as the French consul at the time and subsequently Einar Ben, an Icelandic poet. During the 40s and 50s, it was the location of the British consulate in the city, and then in 1986 it was the location of the Reykjavik Summit, which was a meeting between President Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, which paved the way towards the end of the Cold War. It was during this time as the British Embassy that it was first recognized as a mysterious place, however, with stories of ghosts and strange happenings taking place. According to local legend, it's haunted by the spirit of a young girl, although no one is sure who she is except for the fact that she could be linked to the Viking burial ground that's supposedly beneath the property. The British representative who lived there, John Greenway, became so perturbed by the odd sounds through the night and paranormal events that he wrote to the British government to insist that the consulate was moved elsewhere. And his account was so compelling that later they sold the house back to the Icelandic government just a few weeks later. Even to this day, the official response to questions about the house is, "We do not confirm or deny that the Hofti has a ghost." Number 12. The House of Death, New York. New York has a number of properties that are believed to be haunted, but the most famous of them all is the ominously named House of Death in Greenwich Village. Built in 1856, to begin with, it was a popular place with the rich, becoming home to the family of a railroad tycoon. They eventually moved out in the 1980s, though, and it's since then the house became associated with strange happenings. In 1897, the new owner, a famous cyclist, experienced a moment of recklessness where he hit a young boy while riding and was subsequently arrested. He soon moved out of the house, and the next resident was none other than Mark Twain, who also wrote of paranormal experiences, such as floating pieces of wood and peculiar sensations. Later residents reported seeing ghoulish shadows, visions, and strange noises, and then in 1987 something terrible happened. A young girl was killed there with repeated blows to her head, and the police that attended the scene reported eerie happenings and strange behaviors by everyone present. The parents were arrested and convicted with drugs blamed for their actions, but there has always been the suspicion that the strange aura of the house may have influenced their behavior, with strange events also reported in the neighboring homes. Is it possible that the dark shadow surrounding this house is now spreading? Number 11. Rainham Hall, England. The English countryside has a number of lavish, stately homes, and one of the most impressive of all is known as Rainham Hall. First built in the 17th century, it's become home to the Townsend family for almost 400 years, but is also believed to be one of the most haunted buildings in the country, and was the location of one of the most compelling images of a ghost ever recorded was taken. The Townsend family has been influential in English politics for centuries, with Charles Townsend marrying Lady Dorothy Walpole, the sister of the country's first prime minister, in the early 1700s. He was a notoriously violent man, and after finding out she was having an affair, locked her in the residential rooms and never again allowed her to leave. By 1726, she was extremely unwell and died of smallpox, and most people thought that to be the end of the story. Over a century later, however, during a Christmas party, guests at the hall encountered a mysterious entity, which is now known as the Brown Lady. Believed to be the spirit of Lady Dorothy, she mainly walks up and down the main staircase, which was the setting for the infamous image captured in 1936 for Country and Life magazine. Does this truly show a ghost, or is it camera trickery? And either way, is it possible that the ghost of Lady Dorothy still walks the hall to this day? Number 10. Dragslum Slot, Denmark. Originally built in the year 1215, Dragslum Slot is a castle on the island of Zealand in Denmark. Intended as a use as a home, it was upgraded and converted for several other purposes in the following centuries, such as a fortification against invasion and a prison, until it was blown up by rebels in the 17th century, and work began to completely restore it as a residential castle once more. With its many uses, there are countless tales of atrocities that took place there, from the torture of prisoners to the executions of innocent people, all the way through the 20th century, when it was used as a barracks during the World Wars, and some of the victims are still said to haunt anyone who sets foot there. With reports of 3 distinct ghosts, a Grey Lady, a White Lady, and Lord Bothwell, who was one of Mary Queen of Scots' husbands, had died on the castle grounds as a prisoner. Locals tend to try and stay well clear of the place, despite having now been turned into a luxury hotel. With a large number of guests each year, many of whom want the chance to see ghosts for themselves, do you think you'd be able to get a restful night's sleep on a site where so many people suffered in unimaginable ways? Number 9. Lizzie Borden House, Massachusetts. The Lizzie Borden House is one of the most famous haunted locations in the United States, following a series of tragic events in the late 19th century. Located in Fall River, Massachusetts, it was owned between 1874 and 1892 by Andrew Borden and his wife, where they lived with his daughter, Lizzie Borden. To outsiders, the family lived a happy life and had regular guests who visited to stay with them. But this facade all came crumbling down in August 1892, when both adults were viciously murdered with an axe. Andrew had apparently been struck 10 or 11 times in the head while he was asleep, with such ferocity that one of his eyeballs was split in half, and the first responder on the scene reported hearing Lizzie cackling with laughter from one of the other rooms. Lizzie was arrested and tried for the murders, but was acquitted and spent the rest of her life living in another house in the same town. As for the other building where the atrocities took place, it's now a guest house where there are regular reports of paranormal activity, supposedly the actions of the trapped souls of the people who were killed there. We are constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button. Number 8. Carl Beck House, Canada. For ghost hunters, one of the most accessible haunted houses in the world is the Carl Beck House in Penetanguishene, Ontario in Canada, because it's actually available to hire through Airbnb. The Victorian home was built in 1885 by a wealthy local lumber merchant called Carl Beck, where he lived with his wife and their 9 children. Beck, who also became mayor of the town, loved to display his wealth to others, so much so that he was the first in the area to own a motor car, a 1903 Oldsmobile that's still on display in the local museum. Things didn't exactly go well for the family, though, and his wife passing away from a mysterious illness which left his eldest daughter Mary to take care of her siblings while he continued running his business. When he died, he left his entire fortune to his children, except for Mary, who was given just $1, and this led to her living a life of resentment full of hatred to the hand she had been dealt with. She died a bitter old lady, and it's believed that her ghost still haunts the home to take out her misery on anyone else deemed fortunate enough to own it. Numerous guests have reported experiencing supernatural events, such as objects seemingly moving on their own, strange noises, and chills in the air, something that has led Airbnb to advertise it as a haunted house and provide an ideal place for people to see quite how brave they are. Number 7. Leap Castle, Ireland. Located in Coolderry, Ireland, Leap Castle is believed by most historians to have been first built in the mid-13th century. The site itself had been used previously for a ceremonial structure that's believed to have been there since the Iron Age, and the new building was owned by the O'Bannon clan, who were the secondary rulers of the region. It was a violent time where they'd almost constantly be in battle with competing families, but amazingly they managed to hold on to power for more than 300 years before infighting between members led to a mass killing during a mass in 1532. The castle then passed hands a few times before being almost completely destroyed in a fire during the Irish Civil War in 1922, but has now been mostly restored. For a long time, people were completely unaware of the atrocities that had taken place there, but works in the early 1900s uncovered an oubliette, which was a deep room behind the chapel with sharp spikes at the bottom. The remains of hundreds of people were found down there, making this one of the biggest mass execution sites in the country, and it's believed that some of these victims are the ones who haunt the castle grounds to this day. Ghosts include the Red Lady, who walks the halls with a dagger in her hand, and 2 young girls who run through the hallways. There's also the belief that a non-human elemental spirit haunts the ground, which is described as being the size of a sheep with human-like face, black holes where the eyes and nose should be, and when it arrives it releases a foul odor similar to that of a rotting corpse. Number 6. Monte Cristo Homestead, Australia. The Monte Cristo Homestead is a colorful structure in Junee, Australia, that's widely regarded to be the most haunted building in the country. Its current owners have been there for more than 50 years, but a combination of strange occurrences that take place there, along with horrific stories of what happened to previous inhabitants, have them convinced that they're joined by a trapped spirit. The main specters are believed to be the original owners, who died in 1910 and 1933, but are so vengeful that they've encouraged untold violence and tragedy since then. In 1961, a caretaker was shot dead on the grounds of the property. There's also a story of a pregnant maid who threw herself from the balcony, a child that was dropped down the stairs after a mysterious force knocked it from the arms of the nanny, a stable boy who burned to death in his straw bed, and a housekeeper who tied up his unstable son in the stable for 30 years. People who have stayed in the house have reported eerie visions, unusually dark and evil thoughts, and regular sightings of ghosts that have, on occasion, even been known to reach out and touch people. There's a series of photographs that appear to show apparitions too, which makes you wonder quite what happened to the original owners, that they felt they need to stay around and cause such tragedy to those who came after them. Number 5. Lemp Mansion, Missouri. Built in 1890, the Lemp Mansion in St. Louis, Missouri became owned by the Lemp family that ran the most successful brewery in the region at the time. They were local celebrities thanks to their Falstaff beer, and it seemed fitting that they would live in one of the grandest houses in the city. Things began taking a turn for the worse for the family in 1901, however, when their youngest son, who was 28 at the time and being lined up to take over the company, suddenly died of heart complications. A few years later, his father committed suicide, and then began a whole line of murders and suicides in the home, spurred on by financial difficulties because of prohibition. In total, 6 members of the Lemp family are believed to have died there within a period of 30 years. And among suggestions that some of the deaths were murders that had been covered up to look like suicide, it's thought that some of their spirits still haunt the building to this day. It's regularly been investigated by ghost hunters and is often mentioned as one of the most haunted buildings in America. Perhaps there are still truths to be found about what actually happened there a century ago, and if these are revealed, it's possible these ghosts will be able to finally rest. Number 4. Palacio de Linares, Spain. The spectacular Palacio de Linares is in the center of Madrid, Spain, and was built at some point during the mid-19th century. Once owned by the Linares family, it has since been turned into the Casa de America, which celebrates Hispanic films and arts, but it was the conversion to this new use that uncovered some unexpected mysteries. Builders on the site soon started reporting strange sounds, such as footsteps, creaking doors, and crying babies, and also saw objects moving around, even though the place was supposedly completely empty. All of the incidents took place near a doll's house in the main courtyard, which had been built for Linares' adopted daughter, Raimunda. According to local legend, the couple found out that Raimunda was actually the husband's own illegitimate daughter, and to make matters worse, the mother had been a worker at his father's tobacco factory and was his father's illegitimate daughter. This made the mother his half-sister, so Raimunda was the product of an incestuous birth, which led the Linareses to try to kill her on several occasions. Quite how much truth there is to one of these stories is questionable, but if they were successful with trying to get rid of the infant, could it be her spirit that still haunts the palace? Number 3. Myrtles Plantation, Louisiana. Built in 1796, the Myrtles Plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana, was not only supposedly built on a burial ground, but was also a place where the owners treated their slaves particularly harshly. Originally constructed by General David Bradford, it's arguably karma in action that the family themselves suffered from severe illnesses and deaths during their time in charge of the place. And they eventually lost all of their wealth following the American Civil War, since all of their fortune was tied up in Confederate currency. Since the plantation has been there have reportedly been at least 10 murders on site, along with countless other deaths of those who were overworked, treated poorly, and died of old age. Now a guest house, it's believed to be one of the most haunted places in the state, if not the country, with a reported 12 ghosts who make regular appearances, ranging from former family members of the owners to slaves to former guests who suffered misfortunes of their own. Number 2. Jazirat Al Hamra, United Arab Emirates. Most stories of hauntings around the world are focused on particular individual buildings or locations, but there's one place where an entire village is believed to be home to hundreds of ghosts. Jazirat Al Hamra in the United Arab Emirates was built on a tidal island to the northeast of the country, and by the mid-19th century had a population of around 200 people who made a living fishing for pearls. The inhabitants of the town, however, often found themselves in conflict with the region's rulers, mainly due to the fact that they came from a different tribe, and this led to them being repeatedly harassed, murdered, and tortured by troops as they passed by. Eventually, in 1968, the 2,500 residents accepted an offer to be relocated to Abu Dhabi and left everything behind. With no one interested in moving in, the entire village was abandoned and had fallen into a state of disrepair. Still, because of the atrocities that took place there, it's widely believed that there are potentially hundreds of spirits still present in the area, walking between the long-abandoned structures in what's quite literally a ghost town. It can be creepy enough looking around there during the day, but at night it's said you can hear screams and cries echoing across the wind, and it's a sensation that'll send shivers down anyone's spine. Number 1. The White House, Washington, D.C. The White House is probably the most famous house in the world, having first been built in the late 18th century and being the home to every president since 1800. While significant extensions and upgrades have been done since then, the core structure remains pretty much the same, even though it was almost burned down by the British in 1814. As such a historical place, it's exactly the type of building you might suspect could be haunted. But instead of there being a ghost of a traumatized victim, the one that's seen most often is one of the White House's most esteemed residents, who arguably has unfinished business, Abraham Lincoln. A photo taken in 1869 after he died is believed to show his ghost stood behind his wife, and there have been a number of highly intelligent guests over the years who have reported either seeing or hearing the ghost. These witnesses include President Truman and his family, Theodore Roosevelt, Ronald Reagan, and Winston Churchill, who either heard footsteps or saw a shadow of Lincoln wearing his hat and tails walking by. With the first sightings reported in the 1860s and the most recent ones in the 1980s, could it be possible that Lincoln's ghost has finally managed to move on? Or is he simply waiting for more receptive inhabitants in the mansion for him to try to communicate with? Watch our scary playlist for more top 15 videos about the most scary subjects. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best videos.